Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
What's happening? What's happening?
Camping Trip by Nice Presents 1639. This happened to me and my girlfriend I was dating back in the summer of 2014. This all took place in South Carolina, and my girlfriend and I wanted to take a camping trip. We initially tried to go to a place 45 miles from our hometown, but they were going to charge us double in what we thought we were going to pay for. We decided to head back, and it just occurred to me that there was a spot very close to where we lived. Now, I will say it's more boondocking and off-grid. We didn't have to pay for anything, we just parked the car and would get out. The place is quite gorgeous, though. There's a historic bridge and trail, also some of the oldest railroad tracks in the South. We got there before sunset, so we had plenty of time to pitch the tent and set everything up. There were a few cars when we arrived, but they were most likely hikers and would be gone by nightfall. The only thing that made us uncomfortable was a busted up and rusted old white van with no license plate. We both pointed that out thinking it was weird, but we shrugged it off and started walking to a good place to set camp up. After several hours around 3 a.m. following some quality time spent with her and taking in all the nature and then going to sleep, we started to hear this obscure singing and walking around our tent. From my experience, anytime you hear commotion that early in the morning, nothing good can happen out of it. I peered my head out the tent to see what was going on, and I didn't see anyone or anything. But nonetheless, I didn't want to stay in that area when we were both freaked out. Just because I couldn't see it, didn't mean it wasn't there. But I did a decent walk around our tent. As we were quietly gathering our belongings, we swore we heard the singing get louder. I recall words in the song he was singing had, "Now won't y'all come out?" followed by this raspy laugh. Once we finally packed the tent and were crunching the leaves underneath it, we heard his humming, so we knew this guy was close by. We booked it. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and threw the tent and folding chairs on my back. We made sure to run the opposite way from where all his noise was coming from. Luckily, we set up camp fairly close to the parking lot because I could see lights through the trees. As we ran and scurried away from whoever was chasing us, we noticed the lights from the parking lot weren't just the street lights, but also, to our horror, it was that rusty white van we saw at the beginning. We hurried uphill just hoping this guy was alone. His van was right in front of mine. If he had an accomplice, that would be another person to deal with. As we reached the lot, we got into the bright streetlights, and I noticed my girlfriend's hand make a slight twitch, and her pace slowed down. From that I could tell she was turning her head to take a look at our attacker. I heard her gasp loudly, "Come on, don't look, we're almost there." She focused back on her mission, and we continued running in unison. This guy was getting closer as I could hear the noise of the gravel intensify. I heard his wheezing and him barking, "Don't y'all think you'll get away?" As we just made it past the van, we split, and I handed her the keys so she could unlock and start the car, and I could throw all the gear in the trunk and we could make it out of that place. As I frantically laid the camping gear in the back seat and headed to the driver's side, that was when my body faced forward for the first time in a while. Every noise this guy was making was close and amplified now. With the car running, I kept my head down to put it in reverse, but curiosity got the best of me. In the brightness of my headlights, this guy was a behemoth with a stern, wrinkled face with red patchy hair. A goatee that had dirt and crud smeared over it was on his face, and his eyes were fixated on us like a scope magnifying on two 10-point bucks. He was wanting to kill. "Get back here!" he barked, waving a baseball bat back and forth. I shook my head, and with that I swerved out and we were on the way out with our hearts singing. In the rearview mirror, we saw the man slam the bat in frustration. A narrow escape. We drove to Waffle House and spent the rest of the early morning there until sunrise. Crazy Cashier, submitted by Anonymous. When I was a teenager in my early 20s, I worked at a grocery store in the Midwest. I worked there since I was 16, and by the time I was 21, I became a manager as I tried to balance life working full-time and going to college. One summer, in dramatic fashion, my relationship with my girlfriend came to a screeching halt. As this person was a good friend beforehand, it was hard, and I quickly tried to rebound in any way possible. Although being 21, I was still immature and never fully grasped the gravity of my actions and how they may affect others. There was a cashier I'll call Ashley who worked at the store that was several years younger than me. She was 18, in fact, and a single mother. She had her child, a little girl, at a very young age. So she might not have been in the correct frame of mind when I decided that we would start messing around. She had briefly been involved with another coworker of mine, so her reputation had preceded her. I never considered her as a serious prospect for a long-term relationship, mainly because she had a child. Perhaps that was judgmental for me at the time, but there was no way I could manage what I had already on my plate, plus look after a child. Nevertheless, I began to develop a relationship with her and found myself spending a lot of time with her. She was an easy person to get along with, and we often found that we had many things in common. One interest we had in common was our taste in music. Our taste in music eventually led us to going to a Blink-182 concert together, with several of our other friends. At the time, she insisted that a relative worked for Live Nation, the company that sold tickets and owned many venues in the area. Through this connection, Ashley said she was able to get front row tickets for practically nothing, which sounded great to me because I didn't have that kind of money, nor would I feel good about her spending the amount of money necessary to buy the tickets. We had a fun time at the concert, and things were going as well as they could for a relationship with no serious destination as far as I was concerned. Things progressed normally as they would for people our age as our relationship got more physical. It was really the first time I had felt I was in a casual relationship where anything sexual was mainly for fun, and not to strengthen any bond I thought I might have. One day, we had the bright idea of having sex at work. Since I was a manager, I was well aware of where the cameras were and what we could get away with. The conference room where the managers would have their meetings was a room often unoccupied during the shifts when we would both work. Also, of course, I knew there were no cameras, so we indulged in our fantasy, so to speak, and made it out without getting caught. We agreed to not tell a soul about what happened, as there could be potential huge repercussions. At the time, I was in a band with my two friends, Jake and Rick. Jake was a full-time nurse, and Rick worked with me at the store as well. We had a show at a local dive venue, and if you've ever been a part of a local music scene or known anybody in it, you would understand until you have a following, most shows are just filled with your friends and family that you beg to come. I was about 5 or 6 years younger than both Jake and Rick, and still had a young group of friends that stayed in contact, so the audience was mostly my friends and many of the co-workers of Rick, Ashley, and myself. The set was going well until during a pause in between songs, one of my coworkers yelled out and exposed what Ashley and I had done in the conference room at work, setting off a chain reaction of gossip and mixed reactions. After the show and the following days, I made sure I let Ashley know how pissed I was that she had actually clearly told the others that worked as cashiers our secret, as I hadn't told anyone. The group who had found and began gossiping were clearly people who she worked with and would talk to. Ashley insisted that she hadn't said a word. I, of course, couldn't believe that. In the days following, the news eventually got back to upper management, and we found ourselves suspended pending further investigation, which would culminate in a hearing at corporate headquarters. This was a union store, so when the day came to go to the hearing, we had a union rep who functioned as if he was our lawyer, and it was an actual court case. I say that because practically it became just that. After hours of interrogation and, of course, constant denials on our parts, there was very little the corporate HR could do without proof or an admission of guilt. The store eventually let us come back to work and incredibly pay us for our time off. However, things between Ashley and I changed after this occurrence, as I could barely show my face in front of the employees in her department, as they thought me of a scumbag, and rightfully so. And I held resentment not only towards the workers who gave written testimonies, but also resentment towards Ashley. Nevertheless, our relationship continued. As time went on, I often found myself questioning everything she said to me. There were many other aspects about her that really solidified why I never took the relationship seriously in the first place. I ended up finding out that the concert tickets were purchased by Ashley and were in the ballpark of $800, which was absurd to me. I found out that she had been left a larger sum of money that was in an account until she turned 18, which, regardless of how much it was still weird to spend that kind of money and lie about it to a person you just started hanging out with. Eventually, the money ran out, I'm not sure. So she began cleaning office buildings at night as a part-time gig to help bring in some extra cash. Her schedule at work changed accordingly, and we began working the same shifts less. She often came to visit me on the nights I was working, and one night was especially different because she came to visit me accompanied by another girl who I had never seen before. At this point, our relationship spanned months, and when she introduced this girl to me as Sadie, I was just really puzzled because they seemed like they had known each other well, and she had never been mentioned to me prior. Sadie was beautiful and very dolled up and just seemed to be the opposite of Ashley. Not necessarily because of her looks, but because of the high-maintenance vibe she gave off. A couple of nights after, I was at my friend Anthony's house with his brother Joe. Anthony also worked at the store and was awfully familiar with everything going on with Ashley and me. He made it a point to tell me that he knew Ashley had been stripping. The hours, sudden influx of money, and new friends just screamed stripper. Now, there's nothing wrong with stripping if that's what you want to do to make a living. But for me, if it was true, it was just like the last straw in a lengthy line of lies that didn't sit well with me. Of course, I didn't know for sure, but it was long before I was told by one of her friends who stopped up at the store that Ashley was, in fact, stripping. Her friend Brittany began telling me, as she too was feeling that her good friend was turning into someone she didn't like. After hearing this from her friend, I couldn't wait any longer. I had to call Ashley and tell her whatever we had was over and that I did not want to associate with her anymore. She became hysterical and told me that she was coming up to the store to talk with me before I left. I told her I didn't wish to speak with her and that I was going to just leave, but she did not take no for an answer. As I left work, she had parked right next to my car and was waiting outside right next to my passenger door. She insisted that we needed to talk and I wasn't allowed to leave. She also had her kid in the back seat of her car, which made things even worse. She began blocking my door so I couldn't get in and even went to the passenger side to get in once I unlocked my car. After I realized she was not going quietly, I told her I was going to be forced to get the police officer who was in the store that would be there during closing hours. She didn't budge, and I returned outside with the police officer, who told her to let me leave, and clearly I did not want to speak with her. After realizing she couldn't do anything, she returned to her car, slammed the door, and drove off, peeling out of the parking lot. I drove home, which was 5 minutes or less from the store, and once I had pulled onto my street, which was a dead end, she blocked off the street with her car horizontally so I couldn't actually make it to my house. I began to check for all my belongings because I decided I was going to need to go somewhere she would not be allowed to go until everything blew over. It was at this point I realized I forgot my phone charger at work. So I drove back to work, got my phone charger, and when I was walking back out to my car, I noticed out of the peripherals that someone was trying to get my attention nearby. Out of a car nearby came a beautiful girl that I recognized, dressed in a very skimpy dress. Lo and behold, it was Sadie, who I had just met. She approached me and said she was with Ashley and needed to talk to me. Sadie confirmed that she was a stripper and knew Ashley from the club. She just wanted me to tell Ashley that it was over and be done with it. I told Sadie I tried to do that, but she started to act crazy. Sadie told me to let her in my car to talk and that she would make sure she got out of my car after I was finished telling her that it was over. I reluctantly obliged and let Ashley in my car. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes as I was not looking to prolong this any more than I had to. To my surprise, she left my car without Sadie needing to drag her out. After a huge sigh of relief, I started to drive away until, to my horror, I realized I didn't have my phone. I began to panic as I knew immediately where my phone had gone, but at this point I didn't know how to get it back. So I went to Brittany's house to talk with her and hopefully reason with Ashley to get my phone back. While I was there, I was joined by Brittany and her mom, who had also been experiencing Ashley's rapid downward spiral. They had remarked that Ashley had been leaving her child with them for days on end while she went out and partied, and that she would sometimes not bathe her kid for days. I started to realize that I was in for a lot more than I thought. I finally got a hold of Ashley on Facebook Messenger, and she told me I was able to get my phone. I realized that I needed to be as nice as possible so I could get my phone back and hopefully save some face. When I got to her house, she was standing outside by her car. We had a calm conversation, mostly because I was holding back everything I really wanted to say. After a while, I did get my phone back and I drove home, hoping that it was all over. Several days went by and Ashley and I had only communicated by phone, and she told me she quit stripping, like that was just going to fix the issue. However, as days went on, I started to falsely believe that things would be okay, as we only spoke as friends would until one night I had been drinking and somehow ended up on the phone with Ashley. Ashley was acting weirder than normal and saying very odd, suggestive things. When I asked her to listen to a new song I heard, she replied, "I don't think there's enough time," which really irked me. As I continued to try to decipher why she was acting that way, her voice began to get faint until she was no longer responding. In a frenzy, I called my friend and next-door neighbor Brad to drive me to her house out of fear that something bad had happened. When we got to her house, it was a scene you would see in a movie. It was cold. Snow lay melted on the ground and the house was pitch black, except for a small amount of light emitting from her bedroom window. I walked over and saw her TV was on, but it was on a white noise channel and her child lay sprawled out on her bed to the point of falling off. It was incredible, to the point where it was staged. When we approached the front door, the door was cracked. Again, it was as if she knew how this would all play out. As crazy as it may sound, I looked at my friend and told him we needed to call an ambulance and wait outside, because I did not want to be in the house when EMS and police showed up, making me look horrible in the situation. When they arrived, they entered the house and found Ashley lying on the couch directly in front of the door, unresponsive. They performed several tests for vitals, pricked her hand for blood, and even stuck a tube down her throat, and she did not respond through any of it. However, all of that to say, her vitals were fine, which was the most shocking part. I didn't even know what to think. They took her to the hospital, where she remained in a comatose state for several hours, finally waking up. She was given a psych eval and eventually released the following morning. While at the hospital, I had spoken to several nurses and doctors that were treating her, and no one had any answers for what she was experiencing or not experiencing. They were baffled. I assumed eventually they had some kind of guess as to what was going on, but I was never told. The following days were like the days leading up to the night she went to the hospital. Distant but friendly conversations as I tried to put more space between our relationship. Just when I thought the series of unbelievable events was over, another was about to occur. One of the following days, she realized the area where she had had the IV from her time in the hospital had become infected. So she had to go to the hospital, but this time, since she was admitting herself, she went to a hospital closer where we had gone to school and in the same city as where we worked, which wasn't odd to me. It was the most familiar to her. However, the most coincidental occurrence I have ever witnessed was that Jake, the bass player in my band, was her nurse. Just bizarre. He gave me what little play-by-play he could, but I remember him saying she seemed troubled. The infection was bad as she needed to be in the hospital for several days. During her stay, it was extremely easy for me to put additional space between us, and I almost went silent as that was the end goal. However, there was something that she was also going to let happen. As she could tell I was trying to avoid her, her next course of action led to her showing up at my friend's house during a party to tell me she was pregnant, which I was sure was not true. I just couldn't believe that it could be true. I wasn't even sure if it made sense given the last time we would have had sex. Regardless, I was furious and almost not thinking straight to the point where several hours went by until I realized, of course, I could have just asked Jake. He was her nurse. He would surely know. Jake assured me that she was not pregnant and that they needed to know before they gave her blood thinners, amongst other ways of assuring me she was not pregnant. But of course, Ashley said the opposite to everything Jake said, which was just sickening when I really thought about it. I could not believe the lengths she was going to go to keep me in her life. The most annoying part about the situation was that I could not blow the lid off her claim because then Jake would lose his job. If I had not been tormented enough throughout this ordeal, I might have been impressed. Our relationship finally ended when she came to the store several days later and tried to present me with a forged copy of papers from when her first child was born. It was a superimposed, photocopied mess that sent me into a fit of rage. She left once seeing me lose my shit. After that, much of it is a blur. Obviously, she wasn't pregnant, so her story couldn't really progress too much longer after that. And she somehow finally got the picture and moved on. Years later, she'd moved to Arizona and had several relationships with other men and ended up having kids with 3 different guys in total. For some reason one night, she messaged me on Facebook to see how I was doing, and all I wanted was to hear her admit she had always been lying, which she did. Her simple explanation was that she was young and immature and didn't want me to leave. It didn't seem like a good enough explanation at the time, but it was the right one. It's been almost 15 years since these events happened, and I've had no contact with her. It was the scariest time of my life, and I doubt I will witness anything close to that again. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, send it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell for every time that I upload. Follow me on social media. All the links to that are in the description below. And if you'd like to take it a step further and really support this channel, find me on Patreon. A link to that is below, as is a link to my storefront on tpublic.com. Pick up some Uncle Josh merch. New designs are coming, some that have nothing to do with this channel, but I hope you will find amusing or maybe actually be worthy enough of you picking something up. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.